So good morning and very much welcome to the ENTSO-E, NCS, Nsoe that together organized their fourth cybersecurity event, this time focused on enhancing our grid resilience. Well, welcome first of all to all speakers, panelists, and participants. You see them on the screen also for a while, and especially on behalf of the four bodies that are organizing this event. And we are very, very pleased to have this possibility to repeat the CyberSec meeting, which has become a signature event for EDSO, ENTSO, and ENCS. So today we will focus our webinar on the topic of grid resilience. And this with a specific reference to the grid attacks that Europe experienced, trying to provide a global perspective in this, and having an exchange of views also as a substantial part of this event on the network code on cybersecurity. And to this end, we involved also many experts from the European institution, the grid operators community, and other stakeholders, and you have them all in the agenda. So keep your expectation right high, because it is going to be quite an interesting in terms of content and delivery meeting today. Let me draw anyway first your attention on some of the housekeeping rules that are typical in these web-based seminars, and that you see displayed in this moment in your screen. As a participant, you will be invited to raise your questions via the tool of GoToWebinar. We shall pick a few questions at the end of each intervention upon time and availability. If the questions are exclusive, I will quote you. Otherwise, I will try to assemble similar questions into one question. Please indicate your name and your affiliation, so your company or institution, and this should be done introducing your question. And I'd be very grateful for this. But now, without waiting, I give the floor to the first keynote speaker. First one is Jose Ferrari Carreto, is Vice Chair of EDSO and CEO of Eredis, which is the company leading our cybersecurity working group, and along with some other EDSO member, very active also in the framework of EE-ISAC, the Information Sharing and Analysis Center for European Energy. And EE-ISAC, as you may know, devotes to cybersecurity also a very important job of analysis contribution, depicting early warnings in the sector. Moreover, Eredis is directly involved in the network codes drafting team, providing harmonized rule across the Europe, which is in this moment one of the hot topics. So enjoy this webinar, and we shall try to deliver you the most of the content in the next couple of hours. Now, may I ask on the screen Jose Ferrari Carreto, CEO of Eredis, Vice Chair of EDSO. Jose, good morning. You're most welcome, and please have your speech starting right now. You're muted, Jose. Microphone. Jose, microphone.
It's on.
It's on, and now we hear you. Okay, thank you very much.
It was on already, so I think it was the regie that was not putting me on. So, Robert, I was thanking you. I was thanking you for the invitation, and let me just share a couple of thoughts regarding cyber and our industry. So we know that cyber threats are the second biggest concern for CEOs, only after pandemics and health crises. So this is something that comes in the last annual global CEO survey from PwC. So it's a big concern for the average CEO. And I think that should be even more relevant for the energy industry, and in particular to DSOs. And why? I think that there are four factors that contribute to this. One is that we manage critical infrastructures. Second, we manage as DSOs a huge amount of personal data. Third, we are using more and more digital tools to manage our networks, integrating more and more OT systems and IT systems. And finally, four, we are using a huge number of partners, outsourcers, subcontractors, expanding our attack surface. So we know that this is a reality in Europe and in the world. Recently, in May this year, we know what happened to Colonial Pipeline Company in the United States. It was victim of a cybersecurity attack involving ransomware, which forced the company to put some systems offline and disabling the pipeline it operates, which is the largest petroleum pipeline in the United States, carrying 2.5 million barrels a day of gasoline, diesel, heating oil, and jet fuel on its route from Texas to New Jersey. So it needless to say that as the pipeline is responsible for nearly half of the East Coast's fuel supply, a prolonged shutdown of this pipeline would have caused huge price increases and shortages in an important part of the United States market. And even a short suspension of the pipeline provoked price increases and shortages happened anyway, largely due to panic rather than supply. So an attack to such an important infrastructure, to such an important operator, has a dramatic impact in the final consumers, and we need to be aware of that. I'm aware of that as I know in firsthand what an attack looks like. Before being appointed as the ERED CEO, I was the digital and IT responsible for ADP Group. And in the morning of the 13th of April last year, in the beginning of the pandemic, when we all were learning how to work remotely, and with a lot of people depending totally on digital tools, I was woken up by a phone call from my security director saying that we have been attacked. And I can assure you that it is really a nightmare. Happily, we recovered in record time, totally based on our own resources. And we took the opportunity to learn with this process, and I believe we became even stronger. However, this is a very expensive and painful way to learn how to become even stronger. So we need to be aware of this. This can happen, and this can happen to everyone. So it is really a dramatic issue for our industry, and we need to be aware of the risk we are facing, and we need to assure we are putting all efforts in place to minimize this kind of threats. And I believe that we should do this at two levels, at corporate level and at institutional level. At corporate level, I think that there are 5 aspects that are very important. One, we need to conduct frequent simulations to exercise our workforce in this field. Second, we should implement zero trust approaches, recognizing that it is so important to prevent progression of an attack as to prevent it. And this is important as we are somehow changing the way as we are addressing this threat. Third, we need to segregate systems, and in particular, we need to segregate duly OT and IT systems. 4, we need to implement security operation centers and to engage all operation with those centers and to have them operating on a 24 hours and 7 days a week properly. And we should also to build an ecosystem of partners that can help us in a situation of attack. And we should do that in anticipation. This is important. Like when we are dealing with fires, it will not be under a fire that we look for the fire department phone number or for the police department. You need to know that in anticipation. And finally, you need to pay attention to the most common trade-offs between security and other business-related issues, particularly usability, because no one likes to change frequently passwords or to have very complicated passwords or to have multi-factor authentication systems in place. So we need to pay attention to those trade-offs. At institutional level, I would say that the role of network codes on cybersecurity are fundamental. So, as you all know, DSOs are very happy to lead the process together with TSOs to implement this very important tool and to assure harmonized rules across Europe, not only at cross-border level, but also taking into account the reality of a distributed energy world. And also to assure a common approach towards technology and solution providers, not only for security, but also as a more cost-effective approach to assure our business. And of course, this on top of a more broader EU policy in this domain, and on the important role that ENISA plays in cybersecurity. Because it's truly fundamental that we do not engage in this fight alone. And we know that the enemy is very sophisticated and there is a lot at stake, and we need to join efforts and need to have a common framework to succeed in this field. To conclude, just a final thought about this topic as a sort of a takeaway. And this because I believe that this being very complex, a very complex domain, we need to keep in mind the following. First, we need to be humble, and I think that this is very important. No one is 100% safe. We need to be humble and to recognize the threat and the vulnerability that we all have. We need to be prepared for the worst. And finally, I think that it's fundamental that we exercise a lot, engaging all people in our organizations in this field, in this area, because we need to realize that despite all technology we may have, people can become the main vulnerability in this field, and we need to be aware of that. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Jose, perfectly kept in the time, and thank you for the openness and the transparency that you brought us in reporting about your recent negative experience. I know it has not been easy for you, but this has allowed Reddish to be really among the larger companies that are most committed and most advanced in the analysis process of cybersecurity. Thank you again, and stay around for possible questions afterwards. And now I would like to give the floor to George Koutepas. George is a senior CTI analyst at CERT EU, which is the European Computer Emergency Response Team. And he has accumulated an extensive experience, as I can see here, recap, in most IT security areas and network management. And at EC, he is focused particularly on cyber threat intelligence. So very, very consequent with what we have been hearing a few minutes ago. CERT has also been designated to serve as the national agency to perform the following function in the area of cybersecurity. I'm quoting: collection, analysis, and dissemination of information on cyber incidents, forecast and alerts of cybersecurity incidents, emergency measures for handling cybersecurity incidents. So, George, the floor is yours, and we are looking forward to hearing from you a lot about this. You have got 10 minutes. Please go on.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is, as you mentioned, George Koutepas. I'm Cyber Threat Intelligence Analyst at CERT-EU. Basically, I have to make a clarification here that it's the CERT for the EU institutions, bodies, and agencies, meaning we serve the EU organizations. And we are handling quite a lot of information every day, so I would like to give you CERT-EU's perspective on grid attacks in Europe. Next slide, please. Yes, which basically is not such a clear perspective. We have a lot of knowns and unknowns, and it's difficult to have a complete picture of what is happening concerning threats to the grid, because many things still remain undetected and unreported. And there are many factors for that. The first and most important factor is that only a portion of detected threats are reported by the victims. Some may have fears of consequences, or there is, in some cases, there is no obligation to do so. But and you have to know that this non-reporting of incidents is not only specific to threats to the grid. Many other sectors, unfortunately, follow the same approach. However, in the case of threats to the grid, the issue is amplified because of the importance of maintaining trust on the reliability of the grid. So operators are even more reluctant to report. The second factor is that even if there is an incident and the operators report it, there are some parts of it that should remain secret from the public, secret from possible next attacks, so on a strict need to know basis. So this also puts some more restrictions on reporting. And the third factor is that many attacks are not real attacks. They do not have a strong impact. An attack on the grid is a multi-stage process, and most of the times it starts with a long reconnaissance period, meaning that many of the incidents, which I'm going to mention in the next slides, they're indeed not actual attacks, but rather reconnaissance attempts which have been stopped on their tracks. So we are not sure if such an attack would, if it would be left, it would develop to be something very important and very having a strong impact or not. So next slide, please. So based on our limited reported and limited experience, what we have seen from the actual incidents, what can happen in the grid due to an attack? We have seen cases of attackers disabling grid control equipment, meaning throwing, opening switches and so on. Also disabling safeguard equipment, equipment that is supposed to protect from overloads and so on. And going to more serious situations, disabling computer systems that interface to the operating technology part of the organization, hijacking them and controlling them remotely, or just putting them out of service. What's even worse, in some cases, they can be hijacked and provide false status readings to the operators. Also, we have seen cases where ransomware or even minerware has been installed on operating technology systems. There was public reporting of some Bitcoin minerware being installed on a certain nuclear power station. But also there is the IT side of the organization, which in a way can impact the operational technology side or just induce panic. This can mean that the IT side, the public-facing side of the organization can have ransomware attacks, DDoS attacks, which blackmail the organization, also defacements that can, or which can provide false information to the public, or just be subject to reconnaissance, as I mentioned, because in many cases on the IT non-operational side of the organization, don't forget that over there are blueprints, there are processes, there are things that control the OT side. Next slide, please. Yes, thank you. So discussing some recent incidents in order to get some insights. We had in October of last year an Italian energy firm compromised by ransomware. What's important is that in this case, there were also 5 terabytes of information leaked. In June 2020, the French Foreign Intelligence Agency reported on a 2018 cyber attack. This was black energy malware attacking a wind farm in France. Interesting, they were using black energy, and it was used by a Russian-based threat actor, APT29. This is from our side, analyzing information. This was interesting in its own side because usually black energy was used either from the Sandworm group, which is under the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Russia, GRU, or Berserker Bear, which is under the Russian Federal Security Service. This was one of the rare cases that we saw it being used by APT29, which is under Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service. Sorry, this was Berserker Bear is under Russian Federal Security Service, FSB. Following that, or earlier than that, we had Berserker Bear targeting critical infrastructure in Europe and the US. This was a case of not having significant impact, but rather gathering information for future attacks. Also, in April 2020, we had 8 major energy firms, including EU ones, being attacked. Oh, excuse me. Okay, being attacked, and in March 2020, we had some disruptive attacks against energy firms, although they were not grid related. We had a Croatian energy group being attacked by Klop ransomware, and the parent Hungarian energy group being attacked by DDoS. And we know, of course, the Norsk Hydro, the renewable energy company, that came out with publicizing their attack when they became victim of a ransomware. And this was quite interesting, on one hand, to know how such an attack operated, and on the other hand, that they handled the event in such a transparent way. Next slide, please. We also have seen some strategic web compromises against Ukraine in 2019, meaning fake websites trying to lure personnel to give their credentials and so on. We had in 2017 some strong indications of attacker activity in the US, Switzerland, and Turkey. This was a long period of reconnaissance that would allow the attackers to go on into future attacks. We had the April 2017 case of the air grid in Ireland, which was a mobile network attack. There were some mobile connections to remote locations that were not secured. The attackers managed to breach them. It seems that they were able to read unencrypted information having to do with the grid, and also possibly installed their own malware there. However, there was no serious disruption. Of course, we have the December 2016 attack on the Ukrainian transmission system. It has been well known and well analyzed. The malware used was called crash override or Destroyer. What's interesting takeaway from this case is that the attackers took a long time to fine-tune their tactics and to gain important focused information on the systems that were operating. Earlier than that, there was malware in a German nuclear plant in the OT sector. And what's interesting there is that the malware was even though it was discovered in 2016, it was going all the way back to 2009 and 2010. It was configured, and it was supposed to have been cleaned, meaning that OT systems many times are neglected from usual security operations of keeping systems secure. And of course, also the December 2015 attack on the Ukrainian electricity distribution system. In that case, we had black energy, and of course, it was used to take control of systems and also use some other software to destroy the PCs that were controlling the system. Next slide, please. So, summarizing, the malware we have seen is not so variable, and there are not so many variants as in the cases of normal everyday malware, but we have to remember here that it's highly specialized. We have seen black energies in 2007, Russian origin, Stuxnet, of course, we all know about it, but interesting with Stuxnet, the code is around and can still be used by attackers. Samoon from Iran, which is basically a wiper, crash override from Russia, Triton, which is can cause physical accidents. Next slide, please. And I will just need 2 minutes more. In conclusion, we have seen cases of attacks both on the OT side and the IT side. We have to understand that attacking the OT side requires a combination of skills. On one hand, there has to be strong cyber intrusion skills in order to gain access to the OT side, and also some specialists in the grid itself, in the protocols that they are used, in the communications and the systems that they are used. And of course, all these attacks on the OT side require strong and long reconnaissance, which is an advantage for defenders, as it will give opportunities to detect them. Next slide, and last slide, please. And we should not forget that the OT is not the only vulnerable point for energy organizations. Remember that an organization like this has to keep billing operating, has to keep safe the customer data, has to be able to control smart meters from far away, and has to have public websites that are not providing disinformation or have not been defaced. And don't forget that energy companies, we see it every day, they are very interesting targets for cyber criminals, even more than cyber war attackers. They have big size, they are considered rich, they can provide a lot of money to possible attackers, and they are also in a critical infrastructure, meaning that their public picture has to be preserved. So we have to be careful with ransomware and DDoS attacks. And this concludes my presentation. Apologies for any time overruns.
Thank you very much. I didn't want to interrupt you, George, because it was extremely interesting what you reported, and thank you very much to CERT for the job you're performing. And the tracing of the malware and the ransomware is essential in granting the continuity of operation in our grids, not only the distribution as far as we are concerned as EDSO, but as we see also at the TSO level. And to this end, Joachim Vanzetta, are you asked to the floor? Joachim is a Director, Association Affairs at Amprion and the Chair of the Board of ENTSO-E. And Amprion is one of the 4 transmission system operators in Germany. And they have got the extra high voltage network in the length of exceeding 11,000 kilometers of long length transport, and on an area that extends from Lower Saxony to the Alps. So they are one of those big lines joining north to south in Germany. Achim, you have got the floor, please.
Thank you very much for that, too, and thank you also for the invitation to speak here. I look a bit at the time, so I directly dig into my topics. So I think we're going to approach the question about the grid attacks and what is the context for the TSOs on hand of three questions. The first question is, are the TSOs or Nsoe or both affected by cyber attacks today? And to state that, of course, the European electricity grid is undoubtedly an attractive target for all categories of cyber attackers and potential nation-state hackers. George displayed the long list of different software and attacks which took place, and there's no doubt that this is a big scare which we have. TSOs do, however, have a proven track record when it comes to preventing and defending against cyber attacks. Keeping the lights on is a part of the TSOs, and I'm sure also for the DSOs as well. When TSOs operational system which control load flows, frequency, and voltage, the so-called SCADA and EMS systems, are strictly separated and segregated from non-operational IT systems using the internet. So there is no communication link between the SCADA systems, EMS systems, which are used by the grid engineers in the control centers, and those systems which we are using for doing our daily office work. So this is important to notice. On the other hand side, I have to notice especially that was very often a kind of a topic for a lot of policymakers to say that our standards are too high, in order to deploy the market and to develop the market, because the market participants have to, however, connect to us to give their information, to give their schedules and so on. We have served that, but definitely made no compromises in our SCADA and EMS systems. Security controls and management systems like ISMS are deployed and used in the TSOs to prevent unauthorized access to these operational technology systems, SCADA systems, and its data. However, it should be recognized that cyber attack techniques against operational technologies do exist, which could prove successful, and George gives some examples out of that. Let me give you very brief two examples of cyber attack techniques which could be used to cause TSOs serious operational problems, not within the SCADA systems, but in the environment. The one is the security of the so-called supply chain, and the other one is the cyber attack surface area. Firstly, the security of the supply chain. During the procurement of new software or equipment that includes software meant to support the operational system, how can we as TSOs or also you as DSOs be sure that what is delivered by vendors does not contain any backdoors or malicious codes waiting to be activated by these attackers? Note that the number of documented successful commercial supply chain attacks continue to be increased every year. The most famous example being SolarWinds in 2021. SolarWinds is a US company that provides software widely used by companies and other vendors to manage IT resources. Hackers managed to compromise this software directly in the SolarWinds computer systems. The injected malicious code was then distributed to an estimated 18,000 clients as SolarWinds sent the compromised code to its clients. So this is, ensure, a nightmare if you got it from the vendor directly, the code also when you buy it. The second example is the cyber attack surface area, as I said already. This is the number of points that could be used to initiate a cyber attack on the grid. The number is also continuously increasing and will go up tremendously due to the Green Deal and to the Fit for 55 program of the European Union. This number is attached with the so-called grid edge technology gaining popularity. A simultaneous cyber attack against multiple devices, for example, the PV converters in the households on the roofs or the electric vehicle charging points, could suddenly shut down enough devices, causing a load imbalance, a huge load imbalance, taking in the grid outside its operational safety limits. If you imagine that we have, I would say, thousands, hundreds, thousands, millions of electrical vehicles, and they are charged in the evening and they are shut down simultaneously, that would lead to a very big imbalance, and maybe that will overload our reserve and ancillary service capabilities. So these are two examples for that. And maybe you have doubts. Some of you may have noticed that also Nsoe is going to was I would say the objective for a cyber attack in 2020, and that is true. We had a successful cyber intrusion into our office network of Nsoe. I have to say, not to the TSOs, but to Nsoe in March 2020. This has not impacted at any point or in any time in any manner the operation of the TSO SCADA systems. That is very important to notice, because they are not physically linked to the Nsoe office systems. And that is why they had no impact on the TSOs itself. Also, the information systems you use from Nsoe, they are not hosted within Nsoe, but they are hosted within the TSOs and using own technologies. The second question, very brief, is what are the TSOs and Nsoe in the European Union doing to improve the resilience against possible grid attacks? You will today learn also about details about proposed cybersecurity network codes. Nsoe and the TSOs welcome these proposals, which, if implemented, will help to significantly reduce the overall cybersecurity risk profile of the European electricity grid in total, in general. We already have TSOs with world-class cybersecurity capabilities. For example, deployed cybersecurity operation centers, monitoring TSOs and network systems 24 hours, 7 days a week, and participation in major national energy computer response teams, so-called Tsos, from like George reported. We have a lot of TSOs implemented management systems like ISMS, and we share these best practices among the TSOs in dedicated working groups within the Nsoe organization. One of the key cybersecurity network code objectives is to make sure all TSOs and other essential grid operators comply to the same, I would say, minimum set of security control and requirements. Essential grid operators are only as strong as their weakest link. That's clear. So everybody has to comply to the minimal set of controls. Nsoe have real-time systems deployed which provide early warnings of power problems to all TSO control rooms. By end of 2021, a new highly secure IT communication network will be deployed to all the TSOs, which will carry new pan-European applications such as merging the common grid model of the European TSO system from individual grid model. These applications will greatly improve our balancing operations and our ability to react to disruptive events, including cyber attack. By this way, the name of this network, Physical Communication Network, shows that we are going to operate it by ourselves. You know, the routers are within the TSO premises and are not part of the, I would say, official or public network of the internet. Longer-term investment in TSO security information and event management tools are also planned. It is important so we can identify properly cyber attacks against multiple targeted grid operators. The last question is, are we planning further measures to improve network resilience? Yes, of course we do. Collaboration with other electricity value chain actors, in particular our DSO colleagues, are now essential. Nsoe will take soon a leading role in the developing, implementing, and running the cybersecurity network code. The working group will be shortly established, tasked with the identification of essential business process cyber risk related to cross-border electricity flows. The challenge is moving forward and is identified through proper risk identification, assessment, and management processes and techniques with grid-related systems, the bad guys need to, cyber attacks can cause major cross-border operational and safety problems, and then make sure these systems are adequately protected against cyber attack using good, appropriate, and effective security protocols. It is now time for all grid operators to collectively identify and protect their critical systems, and before the bad guys identify our weaknesses and attempt to cause operational damage. And I all invite you to work together with us to achieve this goal. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the call to action that you delivered with your speech. And without being alarmistic, you depicted a framework of possible risks that are certainly not only emerging but increasing in Europe. Now let's see how is it globally and internationally, if not really globally. And we will now move to the section that provides such an international outlook and landscape vision of what cybersecurity is, according to three very good experts. Let me introduce you Jonathan White, Director of Cybersecurity Program Office at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory at the Department of Energy in the United States. Thank you very much for joining. And then Professor Makoto Takahashi, Director for Control System Security Center in Japan. And joining them is also Tahir Kapetanovic, Head of National Control Center of the Austrian Power Grid and Chair of System Operations Committee at ENTSO-E. Please, you have got the floor. The time allotted is not that much, but keep synthetic, keep it simple, and keep it brief. Absolutely, you are absolutely welcome in delivering your notations here. Please. Jonathan, you are the first on the roster.
Jonathan, we cannot hear you.
Jonathan, so can we maybe go to Professor Takahashi if he's ready, and then somebody please text Jonathan that he will be following. Professor Takahashi, are you online?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Could you change the slide to
yes,
mine?
We cannot see. Yes. And
okay,
something is happening with the cybersecurity at the Department of Energy, probably. Please, Professor Takahashi, you have got the floor.
Yes, I'm here, but I'm still waiting for my slides to appear.
This is one of those embarrassing moments in the webinars. Huh? Here you are.
Okay.
No, but this is still Jonathan. Okay.
Can I start?
This is you, Professor. Yeah.
Yes.
This is you. I see your name on the slide. Please go on.
Okay. My name is Makoto Takahashi, the Representative Director of Control System Security Center in Japan. I'd like to talk about the Japanese situation and some contribution of CSSC to the grid resilience. Let me start with some introduction of CSSC. Control Systems Security Center which has been started 8 years ago. And these three are our missions. One is the research and development with highly secure control system, and also testing and certification of control system, control device, etc. And another important mission is to train human resources to disseminate and promote awareness of control system security. The specific feature of our facility is that we have several test beds that they're the real one, not the simulation, they are the real test bed, which is extracted the characteristic function of instrumentation control system. And we have developed plant simulations for demonstration and cyber exercises. We have already implemented 8 kinds of plant simulators, and one of them are grid power simulation, which is closely related to the topic of today's topic. Next slide, please. Okay, I'd like to talk a little bit about the Japanese situation of grid resilience. As you know, that our cybersecurity is maintained or managed mainly by the MITI, as you know, Ministry of Economy and Trade and Industry. And with the MITI, they have Industrial Cybersecurity Society, and they led the discussion on cybersecurity, and they have the sub-working group for the security for building, sub-working group for space industry, and also they have sub-working group for electric power. And for large-scale electric power company, they have issued the electric power control security guidelines. And for retail electricity company, the small one, also Tsos aggregator, they issued a cybersecurity countermeasure guideline for retail electricity company. And the CSSC is now making contribution to supply chain risk management. That is called of course, you know, the CPIC, Cyber Product International Certification. And about the regulation, and based on the tech spec for large-scale power generation and transmission, 2 guidelines have issued. One is Electric Power Control Security Guideline and Smart Meter Security Guidelines. And for the small-scale generation, like solar power, wind power, etc., we have discussion is going on to introduce cybersecurity issue in the safety regulation. Next slide, please. And about the grid resilience, I myself is from the field of the nuclear power and also some human aspect of safety. So the resilience, organizational resilience is my interest. So I'd like to mention a little bit about the resilience from the human side. Grid should be considered as socio-technical system in which human make positive contribution to enhance resilience. And the capacity or potential to be resilient only partly depends on the technical infrastructure of an organization. Traditional risk assessment approaches tend to break down when it is difficult to clearly identify the threats, assesses vulnerabilities, and quantify consequences. So cyber threats cannot be clearly identified and quantified through historical measures due to the rapidly changing threat environments, as you well know. So my point is that concept of resilience engineering should be adopted to enhance the grid resilience. Resilience engineering has already been applied to the field of, for example, medical operations or nuclear engineering, and also for the transportation infrastructure, which requires higher level of safety. So the specific feature of resilience engineering, that is, it has been set on the ability to succeed under varying conditions. So in my opinions, that this resilience engineering also should be applied to enhance the resilience of cyber resilience of the grid systems. So that is all for my today. Thank you very much. Too short?
Thank you very much, Professor Takahashi. And a very, very interesting perspective you offered from your part of the world, and extremely pragmatic. And I think that there are a few notes that have been taken by our over 330 participants in this moment. And let's try a second go with Jonathan White, Director of Cybersecurity Program Office at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory at the Department of Energy in the United States. Jonathan, have you been able to connect properly now?
We'll see. Can you hear me?
Yeah, fantastic. Please, you have the floor.
Sorry, there's surely some kind of good supply chain joke with my headset and webinar here that is escaping me at the moment. But thank you all for the invitation. Thank you for having us here. I do want to intro by saying that the National Renewable Energy Lab is just one of 17 labs here in the United States that work in cybersecurity across IT and the OT domain. Speaking of a very broad set of researchers in the country doing things from nuclear energy, gas pipelines, transmission, distribution. So there's quite a huge spectrum of work that's being done here. I'm going to speak more specifically to what the National Renewable Energy Lab is doing. And as you can imagine, all of that is really focused around renewable energy and what I like to say, really the decarbonization of the grid. So as the grid evolves and is becoming more decarbonized, there's renewables coming in that have their own unique cybersecurity questions, as well as there's a lot of other changes that I think we can all appreciate are happening, but most maybe don't recognize what that means. And by that, I mean also the energy efficiency improvements. So as we change building control systems or we move to electrified transportations, that's not really renewable energy as much as it's energy efficiency. The other pieces of that, of course, are the changes in the control system. So things like advanced distribution management systems, things of that nature, that are going to make this conversion all possible. But all of them bring very unique and different types of cybersecurity issues in. Let me advance the slide here. So this is the kind of the fundamental graphic that we typically use here at NREL to speak about this transition, mainly from a cybersecurity perspective. And so I think most can appreciate here on the left side, this bulk power transmission changes where we're, here in the US, evolving towards, bulk power renewables, so wind, solar, perhaps geothermal on top of the conversion to natural gas, things of that nature. And so, so that's a good starting point to think about, for example, the United States, if a coal plant goes offline and that's replaced by several hundred wind turbines, your attack surface is very different, because as opposed to one central plant with a central security surface, now you have this distributed, physically distributed set of wind turbines. Sometimes those can even be in offshore, obviously more prevalent in Europe. And those turbines just have different access points, right? So it's not unreasonable for example, an adversary to have the opportunity to set up to a wind turbine for, say, a month or so and have physical access to a turbine to potentially launch attacks, as well as the distributed nature of the turbines, the fact that turbines are, globally monitored. And so it's just a very different kind of attack surface and architecture that can enable, again, different vectors. And then on the other end, on the distribution side of the system, as homes become increasingly intelligent, with all of these connected devices, those provide additional attack surfaces, as well as it starts to become very complex in the United States on whose responsibility it is to secure different parts of this device. As a bulk, it's the utility. At the DMS, it's the utilities. But as it gets more and more down into individual citizens' homes, what responsibility is theirs to protect their devices? And what point do the utilities start to play a role? And of course, typically we look past all these things because we don't worry about them, because one attack to a home doesn't have a bulk power issue. But I think we can all appreciate that there's many different ways in which one could aggregate this set of assets to create a bulk power disturbance, perhaps manipulating voltage or frequency. And so a lot of what we focus on here is trying to understand what are these problems that are coming, and then what are the creative things that we can do to prevent attacks that come in this nature. The question that we'll frequently get here is, oh, with all these conversions, how could you possibly make this more safe than the system we have? But again, take this system and go the opposite way. As a highly distributed system, there's a lot of distributed control authority that I can leverage to thwart a cyber attack. So as opposed to an attack being successful, say on a coal plant, and that having a major instantaneous problem, on this system, the attacker has to get into all of these systems, or a large portion of these systems, without tripping any of the sensing, as well as then attack them unified and coordinated in a way that I've also not detected. And so on one hand, there is some unique challenges here. On the other hand, there's some pretty huge inherent security advantages. This is a highly distributed system, so launching a successful attack on this without being detected or without the utility having a way of responding is also really challenging. So there's a lot of advantages to this conversion, and so a lot of what we're focused on is in this space around how can we make this system more secure, again, especially when we think about the distributed nature of these, the huge quantity of devices associated with these, the supply chain that was just mentioned, and where are these components coming from? And then, of course, the big question is the ownership. So when different players, private citizens, electric utilities, third-party aggregators, when all these different communities come together to run this system, how do we mix all of their motivations together to make sure that security is intact? So one of the pieces that we do here at the National Renewable Energy Lab is that, as you can imagine, to study that system, you need to have that system. And I don't mean conceptually or just purely a simulation, is you need to have a very good simulation of the electrical system, the telecommunication system, the control system, but then you need to have all the physical assets, as was just mentioned. So you need to have a set of physical assets that you can attach. And so what you're seeing here on the screen is just a very simple representation of a cyber range that we've created here at NREL, and it allows us to put together all of the different telecommunications, power control, put all those systems together in a virtual environment, more or less a fully emulated simulation, and then tie in assets from throughout our campus. And so we're fortunate here at NREL that we have a little bit over 20 megawatts of assets that we can put under test in the cyber range, including multi-megawatt turbines, solar, storage, things of that nature, but also electric vehicle charging stations, ADMSs, building control systems, you name it. And so we take these physical assets, we stitch them into the range, and then in that range, that allows us to do the research that's required to study that system, as well as provide training and exercise environments for our utilities, both domestically and globally, to have access to start understanding these new systems and threats, and what some of the new situational awareness tools and mitigations may look like. So my last slide is something that we've just announced here a couple weeks ago here in the United States. The Department of Energy has announced what we're calling the Clean Energy Cybersecurity Accelerator. And so what we're doing here is moving beyond just the laboratories and academia and utilities partnering specifically on research and bringing technology to market. The goal here is that there's so many both new threats, new devices coming to market. We're trying to take a set of electric utilities, partner with them, and provide the range as a shared asset amongst that set of utilities, where we will partner not with individual utilities, but collectively a group of electric utilities pooling their interests together to do exercises within the range environment, so that we can more rapidly be getting next generation cybersecurity solutions to market, whether they come from universities or national labs, or if they're just really good new startup technologies anywhere globally that we're trying to move very rapidly into the electric sector, say in the order of maybe 3 months, depending on when we detect threats. And so with that, that's the conclusion of my slides, and I thank you all for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, John. And now, please, sorry about it. I've got a problem with my screen. Yes, thank you very much. Tahir Kapetanovic, Head of National Control Center of the Austrian Power Grid and Chair of System Operation Committee at ENTSO-E. Tahir, you have got the floor to conclude this wide-ranging analysis of the threat to the grids. Please. Hello? We still do not see Tahir. So, as I see here from the incoming chat and news, Tahir was connecting, but unsuccessfully, I would say. And since time has come for a 5 minutes break, I would call the break in these 5 minutes. I cut it by 5 minutes anyway. And just to be on time, we see in let's say 5 minutes, and we shall allow
good morning.
Tahir.
I apologize. Tahir speaking. There was some issues with connectivity. I also tried to share my camera, but doesn't work. But nevertheless, I'll try.
Yes, Tahir. You just carry on, and we see gray, but we have a camera connected, but it is gray.
Now it should not be anymore. Hopefully, it's now not gray anymore. I'm sorry for this technical issues.
Please go on.
Good morning, and I apologize for being a bit late. And thank you for this invitation, and thank you for the opportunity to maybe say a word about the resilience from global perspective. I will immediately start if you let me share my screen. Just a second. Just trying to, yeah, that's it. Thank you very much. I hope you can see this. Just confirm if you see my presentation, please.
Tahir, we see it. Perfect. Thank you, Joachim here.
All right, thank you. So I will start quite global and high level, and really not touching upon our specific concrete work with Andrea and the colleagues will present later on. Maybe to ask ourselves, why do we talk about grid resilience today? Why is it so important more than ever, and so on? Now, just to be a little bit in theory, what is resilience about? I think resilience is mainly, the goal of resilience should be, well, prevention is a pre-phase, but if there is a degradation at system stage, this should not be very deep, very long. There should be very short degraded states, restoration should be fast, and then we should be soon back to normal. I think it's very simplified, and forgive me, not really very correct, but at last I hope pragmatic picture what resilience should be delivering. Where we stand in the electric power systems today is the transition from a hierarchical one, which was there 35 years ago when I started my career, to this pluralism of all kinds of grids and everywhere and everything. I have here just an example from my country, from Austria, what we do expect out of this pluralism, out of the decentralization, democratization, more and more smaller volatile units and so on, there is a big discrepancy between the load curve, which is, let me just switch on my laser pointer that you see it better, which is this line here, and then some generation from intermittent sources and others, and we see that we will be really, there will be a mismatch even bigger than today. But I would say there is also a mismatch between the main resilience goal, which is, as I tried to explain very briefly, this shortening of the disturbed or degraded situation and the challenges of this new pluralist world. There is more volatility, there is lesser predictability, stability. We just learned in one of these disturbances we had on the internet this year, there is a challenging controllability, adequacy, and so on and so on. So this all is even growing further with this plethora of the effects of digitalization. Now, when I say digitalization, I'm a little bit, I have twofold feeling, because I am 58. My first computer I had 40 and some years ago, and it was also digital. I think we are using this word digitalization for all the other areas, for the artificial intelligence decision support systems, for cloud computing, for flexibility, for market. Basically, market is only working if there is internet and digital and so on. And there is, of course, a plethora of threats which go with this. So I think this is the reason why we talk about resilience on a global perspective and on the practical one as well. Just to be a little bit more practical, because my job at home is responsibility for control center, for system operation. We know that even the best prevention will not exclude incidents. This is when the resilience comes in. Resilience means, very simplified again, that people and system can restore back. And as an example of the 8th of January 2021, we really had a demonstration of good resilience. This is just a snapshot from our final report, which you can find on the Nsoe website, published on the 15th of July, and there will be some small changes published now soon. There was really a recovery of this system split within 1 hour. There was another example of 24th of July. We are still investigating it, but we see there in this example, there was really an excellent and really good cooperation of distribution system operators and transmission system operators. But this, forgive me for saying only here, it's only power system. What about the digital dimension? Again, to repeat what I said in a different way, digitalization brings us a big number of smaller units, micro units, solar power, wind generation, but also biogas, thermal units, everything connected to everything, I would say. So this hierarchy is not anymore there, and we have these kind of generation and users. I would not just call them the generation, but demand, generation, prosumers, everything connected on all voltage levels of distribution and transmission grids. So the risk here is that simply this huge complexity fails and that resilience will be lower. And this is where we need to do something. The risks are quite a few. I just picture here a few of them: failure of control systems, some manipulation, malicious attacks, unexpected behavior of smart systems, unpredictability, etc. And the mitigation, we already do something. There are standards around, there are regulations to be developed, like cybersecurity network code. We need also to invest a lot of effort in the new skills of our staff in charge of the system at all levels, and also to go towards really holistic view on power and cyber incidents. To conclude, together with distribution system operators and TSO system, transmission system operator, we really started some real hard work. There is really an excellent cooperation on cybersecurity network code in the pre-phase. Now we are now in the drafting phase. Andrea will tell us more about it later on. Andrea Pascini, our chairman of the ENTSO team. There is also something I'd like to draw attention. In the next days, there's going to be published a risk preparedness document according to Article 5. Risk preparedness as a, I would say, a prevention phase for the better resilience. where there was an analysis of possible scenarios for regional risks and regional threats to resilience. And I shall say at the bottom line of my intervention, we will deliver successfully because there is no other outcome we can accept. Thank you very much.
We thank you for your being so clear, so detailed at the same time, and so concise. So thank you very much, Tahir. And certainly we can allow the 5 minutes break that are on the agenda. See you all back at 10:45 for a deep dive on the situation of the codes. And where are we with the cybersecurity network code? Just one observation before that, and it is that resilience, as many words, has got a Latin origin, and resilience in Latin, as a matter of fact, means bounce, the ability to bounce back and to react. And as an extension, referring to institution or bodies or persons, is something that opposes resistance and defends itself, himself, or herself, and tries to get up again. And we have seen how successful this can be today. So see you later in 5 minutes. Enjoy your post. Thank you very much. So I'm kindly ringing the bell and call you back to join us. We didn't lose participants in this break, and I'm happy to introduce now the deep dive session that will introduce the grid operators on the network cybersecurity code. So we are trying here to deliver the TSO and the DSO perspective, and we have Olivier Clément from Enedis for the DSOs, and Andrea Foschini, who are both playing a role in the national code drafting team, and that will provide a joint presentation. Andrea has already been slightly introduced by Tahir a few minutes ago, is in representance of Nsoe, and is belonging to the largest, one of the largest TSOs in Europe. Thank you for being here. And please, Andrea, Olivier, you have the floor. I think is Olivier starting, is head of anticipation and external affairs entities, and the DSO expert for network code drafting team. And then will be Andrea. Will introduce you, Andrea, properly right after after Olivier. Please, you have the floor.
Good morning, everyone. I'm really sorry, I cannot manage this the slide. I think it's quite difficult at this moment. Could you please take the slide from your side, because it's really difficult at this moment. Is it possible? Hello?
Yes, we will take them.
I would really appreciate if you could do that, because really now I'm just lost. Thank you very much. Please, Andrea.
Yes, thank you, Roberto, for this introduction to us. And actually, we thought about how to deliver this speech, and I think we found a very interesting and also funny way to go into details of the network code, because we will actually do a joint presentation, so there won't be an Nsoe, a TSO view, and then a DSO view, or on the opposite, but we'll just share our view on all the parts of the network code, and we will do some kind of a, bouncing back from me to Olivier for the whole presentation. So I would like to start with a question to Olivier. So why do you think, and go to the next slide, thank you very much, from the control. And Olivier, why do you think we need actually a network code, given the
okay, maybe we can go to the next slide, definitely. Well, I think for the why, it's quite obvious, and I think that's quite all the panelists already answered to this question. Maybe you can go to the next slide, please. Next slide. Well, the energy sector is a critical sector, definitely. Maybe a super critical sector, in fact. The threats are increasing a lot. Could you please put, yes, thank you very much. This is a real-time requirements and the cascading effects and the technology mix with a lot of legacy system just mixed with the digitalization of the grid. So definitely, I think the why, we already all know why we need a network code. We need it urgently with the threat increasing, with the grid, which is only one. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on that one. I would prefer to ask you, Andrea, the how. How do we develop the network code according to you, Andrea?
Yeah, next slide. Thank you. There is an animation, I guess. Yes, the network code is an European regulation. So of course, as a development process, is regulated by the regulation 714 2009, and it's essentially a regulation that is legally binding, and every entity within the scope will have to comply. And the main, the crucial aim of the network code is not to duplicate, on one side, not to duplicate national regulation, because national regulation are
the basis of the network code, but but to be consistent with the national regulation. So actually insert a higher view regarding national regulation and having the opportunity to give to the important topics of the network code, like the risk management, crisis management, and incident management at European level, a common framework where all the national regulation will be able to fit in. And of course, to do all of this, stakeholder engagement is crucial. And this is why this network code is the first one to be developed under the new SAP rules, and with the identification of a drafting committee with the main stakeholders already in, that are already collaborating with the drafting of the network code. And then going to the next, yes, to the next slide. Thank you very much. Olivier, can you please explain what is the process, what is the timeline for the network code to be developed?
Okay. The journey began in 2019. You can move to the next slide. And end of 2020, we just TSO and DSO delivered the final report. And in 2021, SR published publicly the framework guideline concerning the network code in April. And in July, he published the final framework guideline after a consultation in June. So now we are just in the official drafting network code, began in August, and it will be finished in mid of January. We will deliver a network code in mid of January to SR. Before that, from mid-November to mid-December, we will conduct public consultation to receive all the comments and the advisory for everybody. Then the ASER is going to work on the network code during 2 months, something like that. And then the network code will go to the adoption as a delegated act. It should be finished, I guess, end of 2023, if everything is going well. And then a transition period will begin, and with the full enforcement, something like 18 months after the entry into force. Let's move to the next question, Andrea. The who. Could you please move to the next slide?
Yes.
Who will be involved in the implementation of network code, Andrea?
Yes, of course. And in this slide, you can have a quick overlook on who will be involved. On the left side of the slide, we report a table that was already in the framework guidelines. As you have seen in previous slide from Olivier in the timing, on the 23rd of July, ACER published his framework guidelines that are very important and guiding documents to draft the network code. And in the framework guidelines were already listed several entities in the scope of the network code. And on the right side of the slide, you see an anticipation of what's in the legal text. Is a word cloud. So essentially, the biggest the entity is represented in the circle, and the more activities as assigned in the network code. Here you see that the major part, most of activities are in charge for Nsoe and the UDSO. And this is something that is quite straightforward, because actually TSOs and DSOs are managing the network, and so are the risk owner, if you want. And if you see the whole network code as a tool to manage cyber risk, then of course the most activities should be in charge for the DSOs and the TSOs. But then you have also important stakeholders at the institutional level, like European Commission. DG Energy itself is, of course, the governing body of the regulation. And then we have ACER for the regulatory side, and also CERT and NISA play a close role in the part related to the cybersecurity incident management, of course. And this is of course, during the public consultation, the full draft of the legal text will be available for everyone. So these entities will be mapped in activities and who does what. And this is something that will be released in early November. And here, so I think we can go ahead with the next slide. And here we start talking about the what. So what is in the legal text of the network code? And here you have the listing of all the titles of the network code of the legal text, the current draft. And I think we can immediately go in the next slide and start talking about risk management at union and regional level. So next slide, thank you very much. And Olivier, why do you think there should be a risk management at union and regional level? This is a question for you.
Well, the union level is supposed to play two key roles, from my understanding. The first key role, the union level, has to create and provide common tools, common way to assess, and common methodologies. And B, the union and regional level have to take care of the big pictures and reveal systemic risk. This is what I think the union and regional level should achieve.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. And I think this is topics that are fully covered by the network code in its current draft. Actually, we can see the risk management cycle at union level as a two-step process. The first process is related to estimate the impact of entities within the scope. So essentially, we have to rate the entities based on the importance they have in the cross-border of electricity resilience and cyber safety. So this is the first step, and we can expect every entity within the scope to be rated in a like a high impact or a critical impact or normal impact entity. And regarding and after this risk classification, different requirements in terms of cybersecurity will be addressed towards the entity. Of course, we have also the threshold, the definition of threshold, very important. So to understand if you are high or critical, there must be a threshold to understand this. And then if we move on the other side of the regional cybersecurity risk assessment, it is a higher level of cybersecurity risk assessment with assessment of cybersecurity risk for cross-border of electricity flows, and of course also risk treatment and risk acceptance of cross-border flows. This is very important because, as we always say with Olivier, DSO and TSO are currently managing and assessing, treating, and accepting risk, cyber risk every day, because every time you do something on the cybersecurity, you're actually accepting the risk of doing this and don't do is what you do. And but a regional and the union level, this is quite different because we are working together. So we to actually have a common body to accept the risk, or at least to give guidelines for risk acceptance. So I think we can move to the next slide. And this is a new question for you. So why do you think we need a common language for the cybersecurity in Europe, Olivier?
Well, indeed, we are sharing the same grid, a European grid. We are sharing more or less the same tools, the same equipment, and finally, we are sharing the same cybersecurity threats. So yes, definitely, we should share the same language and minimum cybersecurity requirements and controls. When I say minimum, I really think that it should not be too demanding requirements because, first, we don't have a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of people to implement too many requirements, so it should be minimum. And two, mandatory is good for minimum, but we should keep the place for voluntary. Cybersecurity is creativity and innovation, and we should keep that in the energy sector. My final answer is yes, we need a common language, but we need a not too costly language.
Yes, and this is why in the legal text of the network code, we're actually thinking about a framework that's made of 4 parts. And the first 3 parts are essentially there to meet your requirements, Olivier, about being some kind of a scalable framework for all the entities involved. And we're talking about first level of requirements. We call it cyber hygiene, in line with the standard that the NISA set back, I think, 2 years ago, in 2019, for minimum cybersecurity requirement for entities. And then we have the 2 levels of the framework for high impact entities and critical impact entities. So we are going up in the ranks, and we have minimum cybersecurity controls for high impact entities. So the idea is exactly what you're saying, not to waste money, but to have the right cybersecurity control in place, implemented in a common fashion, so that you are not leaving out, the security of a chain is always on its weakest link, and we want that we want to not to have a weakest link in the cybersecurity of the energy sector. So this is why a common set of controls. So we have minimum cybersecurity controls and advanced cybersecurity controls, and in order to be ready to meet all the national regulations, all the national standards. As we all know, several member states have already developed some kind of national standard for cybersecurity. Also, a mapping matrix will be provided in order to provide a mapping of these cybersecurity controls in the network code with the main international standard and national legislative frameworks, so that everyone, we are trying to not to have the double reporting problem. You have to comply already to NIS directive, you have to comply to GDPR, and of course the network code wants to build on this instrument and on national instruments, and not to be just another burden to report. So this is the idea. And then what do we want? Next slide, please. Yes. And here, what are your expectations about member state level framework for cybersecurity?
Well, I guess it is probably one of the hardest areas of this regulation. On one side, we have to assure consistency of the cross-regional approach. On the other side, we have to integrate the approach with national cybersecurity strategies that have been developed in several countries during the last decade. But I think we should keep in mind another thing. We should be careful not to ask too much to our national authority. It could be challenging for them to comply with all the requirements put in the network code. And this regulation is probably the first of many other sectorial regulations.
Okay, and also here we have we are covered within network code essentially at member state level. Main contents will be the definition of criteria for high and critical impact entities that are aligned with the cybersecurity impact indices that have been developed at union level. So essentially at union level, you have, like we said in the last slide, the definition of what kind of criteria are used to define who is a high level, high impact entity, who is a critical impact entities. And here at national level, we are actually the definition and the identification of high and critical impact entities. And this is very, we feel this is the right way to go, because at every nation level, we have the local entities are aware of what kind of cross-border flows are going outside and inside the member state, the nation. And so this is the right spot to make the assessment of who is high and who is critical impact. And then, of course, we have the other side of the risk assessment. And also at member state, we are advocating the execution of a risk analysis and evaluation. Of course, the risk analysis is just done just like literature is asking us to do, with an evaluation of the threat, the vulnerabilities, and then a definition of a verification scheme to audit the implementation of the national framework. And this is very important, because you can't really control something if you don't measure it. It's very important to be able to have a metric and a criteria to measure the level of risk that you are mitigating. And this is why we need a verification scheme to verify and audit the implementation of the national framework. Then we can go to the next slide. And so we started with union level, we are member state level, and now we are at entity level. Yes, just another click. And here, Olivier, what do we need at entity level? So I'm a TSO, you are a DSO. What do we need to better contribute to this kind of framework?
Well, at entity level, I guess risk analysis is an exercise that we know quite well. At the same time, we must be careful not to ask too many reports, requirements, and obligations from electricity entities. We firmly believe that cybersecurity should be the top priority, definitely. But we cannot do everything at the same time. And any requirement that has a financial impact should be carefully checked.
Yes, this is very important. At the entity level, the network code is asking high and critical impact assets and entities to perform a risk management, and we have to underline here, just like what was said in one of the previous speech today, that this is not limited to the perimeter of the entity itself, but it must be also extended to the supply chain, because actually what TSO and DSO are doing in this digitalization of the electric sector is to integrate more and more IT components that are really part of the operation system and are and may not, we hope, introduce vulnerabilities. So it is very important. Cyber risk management is actually providing supply chain control. And this is, and for the rest, risk assessment and risk treatment is actually the main components of risk management. And of course, on the other side, we have the reporting that is important as well. So I think we are pretty finished, yes.
Well, yes, I will move to supply chain. Roberto, how many times do we still have? Okay.
I think you're muted, Roberto. I can't hear you.
Anyway, supply chain. What is your view about the supply chain, Andrea? What should you like the network code to achieve on that one?
Okay, in my view, network code should at least create a framework in order to have a better governance of the supply chain, because supply chain is playing a very, very important role. We like TSO and DSO, we are acquiring and purchasing components that are more or less a black box. So it's very important to have a tool in a network code to impose some kind of requirements and to have evidence of these requirements implementation.
Okay, so definitely, Andrea, the network code is going to answer to your question with two concrete tools. The first one is the network code will prepare a set of requirements for ICT product, ICT services, and ICT processes. The sets will be harmonized and will be integrated in the EU certification schemes. With the sets in hand, Andrea, it will be easy to incorporate these requirements for new procurements, and it will be the same for every electricity entities in Europe. But including requirements in procurement is not enough. We need, just like you mentioned, to check if these requirements are implemented. To that end, the network code will also develop verification schemes that helps electricity entities to determine whether the product or the service meets the requirements. So to resume, two concrete tools, minimum set of requirements, and verification methods to determine if a product or a system meets this requirement. We can move to information sharing, slide 8. What are your expectations, Andrea, concerning the incident and handling and crisis management?
I think it is paramount because, as was already clear in the introduction, this is a network code for cybersecurity on cross-border flows. So essentially, no entity in the scope can think about operating alone on its own procedures of incident and crisis management, and of course, information sharing as a prevention to incidents. So I think it's of paramount important, and I think that please explain how the network code is dealing with this, because it's really, I think, a very important part of the network code.
Sorry, did I hear something? Somebody?
No, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So what you're saying is key. Sharing information is one of the best ways to protect community. But in the same time, the information exchange should not give an information to the bad guy. And I think it's really not easy. Even if you just say that one European electricity entity is under attack, the bad guy will know that they are doing that somebody is looking at them. So we have to be very careful, and it's really not easy. Second point, sharing information is important, but we don't want to share gossip. What we want to share is information, technical information to protect electricity entities. It seems obvious, but if we stay focused on delays, we may miss the most important part to protect electricity entities. So the network code concept is to categorize information in three kinds with three processes to share information. Reportable, cybersecurity incident, which is the most important one. If nothing is done, the incident could turn quickly to a cross-border electricity crisis. So in this case, delays are highly important, and all actors should provide their best effort to find a solution to the incident. The second type is the zero-day vulnerability, and the third type is the threats such as attacks connected to third parties. I think we should move to the next slide. I wanted to talk a little bit more about this slide, but I think we have to rush a little bit. So maybe we can move to the next slide and just to talk about the cybersecurity exercise quickly, Andrea, and then we can just conclude.
Yes, I'm sure you're going to explain it very well. Exercise is key important because you can't really operate on anything if you're not adequately trained. So please explain how in a network code is going to take care of this aspect.
Just like you said, practicing is the best way to test processes and to identify what we have to change to ameliorate our organization. So the framework guideline proposed two kinds of exercise. The first one is the, could you please move to the next slide? The first one is the internal exercise that can be also a national exercise according to the national authority. And the second exercise is a regional or a cross-regional exercise. Andrea, you said that we should not multiply exercise, so definitely this is something that we keep in mind in the network code, and we try, if there is any exercise in cybersecurity in the same area, just like regional or European, we will have the opportunity to just keep it together. So let's move to the last slide to conclude. Maybe we could conclude with two words, one opportunity, one threat concerning the network code. What do you want to take, Andrea?
Yes, the opportunity, the bright side. Yes, the opportunity is to have a common framework for cybersecurity shared with DSOs and TSOs. This is very, very important if we all operate, because in the end, DSO are connecting to the grid of the TSOs, and actually we are sharing the same grid. So it's very important to move in cybersecurity, to move on the same ground and to have the same important point in place. What about the threats?
Yeah, just like you said, it's really important, and it's wonderful to be. It's a good opportunity to do that, but it is difficult to use. But yes, the agenda is extremely tough, and the development team is working very hard and very fast. But this is not the best way to avoid issues or bad concepts. And the development team really wants to create the best regulation. So yes, when I see the development team with all its expertise, I'm fully optimistic. But the exercise is extremely difficult, and we have to be very careful, because what we are doing today will last for years. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Roberto.
So thank you very much. It was quite an interesting exchange of views among the two of you. And you have been very, very good in using this joint opportunity. So, guys, we had Olivier Clément from NADs and part of the DSO expert network code drafting team. And on the other side, for the TSO, Andrea Foschini, head of cyber risk management and policies, cybersecurity, and the security platform at Terna, the Italian TSO. and the TSO lead the network code drafting team in these days. So thank you very much for your contribution. And my doubt is that if for our 5th cybersecurity event, shouldn't we invite also a couple of bad guys? So that would be quite a nice exercise to bring on the screen or live. But let's think of this. I trust that your job is continuing and that the delivery of the network code will be timely and appreciated. Thank you for joining. Thank you very much for being with us. And now I'm honored and pleased to hand over the screen and the floor, the virtual floor, to a friend and a very much esteemed colleague. And we have been partnering on these issues since many years now. Anjos, you are welcome for this event as well. Good to see you on the screen. Long time no see physically, but we should catch up. Please, the screen is yours and the participants as well. Please.
Thank you very much, Roberto, for this warm welcome. And also to the audience, welcome to the panel discussion on the stakeholders' view on the network code cybersecurity. And a special warm welcome to our panelists. I'm really happy for the opportunity to discuss the network code with this distinguished group of stakeholders who will be active in or affected by the network code cybersecurity. So let me first introduce the panelists to you. And I'm still waiting a bit for them to join in the picture. And so I'll start with Manuel. So Manuel Sanchez has been active 25 years as policymaker at DG ENER, and he has been the leader of the Smart Grid Task Force. After his retirement, he was hired by Acer as a consultant to lead the preparations for the network code cybersecurity. Then we have Arjan de Jong. He is an inspector specialist of the Radio Communications Agency of the Dutch Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Policy, which is the national competent authority for the NIS directive and the upcoming network code cybersecurity in the Netherlands. From the European Commission, we have Felipe Castro, who joined DG ENER in May this year to work on the network code cybersecurity, coming from the telecom section. DG ENER will approve the final legal text of the NCC, the network code cybersecurity. Next, we have Maarten Hoover. Maarten is the technology director at ENCS, the European Network for Cybersecurity, and a member of the Network Code Cybersecurity Drafting Committee. Then we have Onuf Caron. He is the director of ELAT NL, which is the Dutch Expertise Center for Electric Vehicle Infrastructure and Grids, with a strong focus on protocols and standards. Electric vehicle infrastructure will be in the scope of the network code cybersecurity. And last but not least, we have Charles Dixon, CEO of Wind Europe and chair of the ENTSO-E Advisory Council. And also wind infrastructure will be in the scope of the network code cybersecurity. For the audience, you can raise questions via the question option of GoToWebinar. We will try to answer the questions, and if not possible, we will get back to you after the webinar. So now let's get started. Previously, Olivier Clément and Andrea Foschini discussed the upcoming network code cybersecurity. That was quite interesting way to present it and very clear what, let's say, is aimed with the network code, and also to point out certain challenges. As you, the panelists, are also involved in network code cybersecurity, I would like to ask you the following question. What do you think will be the impact of the network code cybersecurity, and what are advantages and disadvantages of the network code cybersecurity? I will make an order to give you the opportunity to respond to this question. And Charles, may I ask you to be the first one to answer this question?
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you very much indeed, and delighted to be taking part in this discussion, both representing the entire value chain of wind energy in Europe, and wind is now 16% of all of the electricity we consume in Europe. According to the EU scenarios, it's going to be half of the electricity we consume in Europe by 2050. And as you have noted, Anios, I wear a second hat some of the time. I am the chair of the advisory council of ENTSO-E, which is the body of 12 stakeholders from across the whole value chain of electricity, which acts as the independent advisory council of ENTSO-E. Look, it's very good that we have the revision of the NIS directive and that we're then going to have the network code. We need the standards. In the wind industry, I mean, just to put this on the record, we apply 2 sets of standards at the moment. For the technical requirements in the wind and solar sectors, we apply IEC standard 62443, and for the management procedures for cybersecurity, we apply ISO 27001. Having the standards in the network code will be great, but on their own they won't be enough. Or maybe they will be, but the crucial thing, and the thing that we really want to see reflected in the standards, is that they consider the impact, the full impact that any attack might have. And I speak on behalf of the wind sector, which has some large wind farms, but lots of small wind farms. And the ownership of those wind farms is extremely diverse, extremely disparate. There are many wind farms consisting of 1 turbine only, owned and operated by 1 individual. There are many small wind farms that are owned by a very large company, maybe part of a much larger group such as Enel and Iberdrola. And of course, attacks on those small wind farms that are part of a much larger portfolio can have extremely broad impact. And so it's very important that the network code should factor in those particular considerations. Those will be my opening comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And Onno.
Yes, thank you very much. I hope everybody can hear me. While listening, I got back to the practicality of every day. We at ELAD, we are initiated by the Dutch grid companies. We, as Anja said, are strongly involved into protocols and standards, but we also advise municipalities in Holland with their tender documents for charging infrastructure. And the first things we started with were just the grid components, the functionalities, safety, etc. Second, we introduced smart charging rules. So what should be in what should be a functionality with regard to smart charging? And now we're discussing with municipalities the functionalities with regard to cybersecurity. And you see that in fact they are not yet, they heavily rely on specialists like our organization to get the knowledge and the information to get these functionalities into their tender documents. And having said that, that means that in fact there is not a standard they can just take off the shelf, as it were. At the moment, what we do is de facto giving them these rules in close cooperation with ENCS, etc. So I think we are covered in a way, but it's not de jure. And I think that getting electric mobility into these network codes will be a very important issue, and making it a formal standard, as it were, making it a de jure, something they have to follow, which something they can get off the shelf, as it were. So that would be my opening remarks, Anjos.
Thank you very much for that, Onno. Then I take it further to Martin.
Yeah, so I think for the drafting team, the big hope for the network code is to be able to mitigate the cybersecurity risk we see are increasing by creating a harmonized security level in Europe. And as sort of a disadvantage and advantage there, I see that the network code is quite ambitious in trying to do everything on a risk-based manner. So there will be a 2-yearly risk assessment cycle, I think, as Olivier and Andrea explained. And this risk assessment determines which entities are in scope, which assets within entity are in scope, and also which measures are taken on these assets. So everything is dynamically determined by a risk assessment. And I think this has a very big advantage in that we can react to changes in both the smart grid as it's developing and also in the threats as they develop. And I mean, the previous presenters also discussed that there are big changes already happening and more will come in the coming years. So I think this is a critical advantage in the network code and how it's being set up. The sort of the flip side is that it only works if the risk assessment is done well, and that will require a lot of hard work from the DSOs and TSOs for Nsoe and the EDSNT, but also from all other stakeholders involved. If we want to really understand the risk, I think we need everyone in the sector to contribute their expertise, risk assessment, and to really identify core problems that we want to mitigate. And I think this will be a challenge to come together in the coming years and to really do this well and to identify the key risk and the right measures to mitigate them.
Thank you very much for that, Martin. Then Manuel.
Yeah, good morning. Well, thank you very much for the invitation. I have the great opportunity to conduct and collaborate with ACER effort to deliver the framework guidelines in July. And it's now very interesting to see and listen other opinion of stakeholders about the framework guidelines as well as the drafting process initiated already since July. You have two questions. One, what are the impact and what are the advantages and disadvantages? I guess the impact is already recognized by previous speakers. They say it's very important for the electricity market design. This network code is going to support the energy transition. Somebody said that I think was Tahir Kapetanovic, that the digitalization introduced higher easy operation, or let's say it's a tool for easy operation, but also introduce complexity which could reduce the resilience. And this is the topic where this network code, I think, is contributed exactly impacting the support of the energy transition and the digitalization. I remember many times listening from stakeholders that what we are missing in cybersecurity in energy is the time. And I think the network code is really want to start right now. As soon as it is adopted, it proposes a transition phase. I think it's unique thing in network code, doesn't wait for 1 year, 2 years to start the implementation. Wants to be implemented in the first month of entering force. That's a good point. The second point is about the market. Many stakeholders recognize that if there are no security, especially in the infrastructure for transmission and distribution, and with the complication or complex process of more distributed generation, if there are no security, there are no market. I think also the network code is going to contribute there. Therefore, the first big impact of the network code is really on the electricity market design. The second question you put on the table right now is what are the advantages or disadvantages? And this, during the time I have presented the framework guidelines, was like the first question for the audience. What are the advantages? What do you think about the complementarity with the current European legislation? And here is where the advantage of the network code has two legs, two important bases of principle. One, the complementarity with NIS2, as well as the Directive for Resilience and Critical Entities. This is essential. We are not going to invent again new rules. And this, for instance, one example is that the the network code should be more specific and complementing, this is the point, more specific in description, for instance, what entities are in the scope, what are the definitions, what are the reporting process, what are the exercises to be developed. All these things are elements with a huge description already in the framework and is going to be translated into the drafting of the network code. Also, the network code should not go further than the NIS2. For instance, or let's say, it's going further than the NIS2, pardon. For instance, on the requirement for information sharing. It was already described by Andreas, and this is important that specific issues are taken into consideration and specific obligations are described. And the second big point on the advantages is the consistency. Consistency with European legislation and national legislation. I give you 3 examples. The network code is not provide alternative to requirement present in the NIS2. This is recognized in the public consultation we made in May. The network code is not hindering implementation of requirements also presenting in the NIS2. This is also one of the big agreement and supporting of the stakeholders when they have been consulting. And also another thing I want to remark is this network code is not looking forward or establish new actors. It's reinforcing the rules set up by existing new legislation. It's not reinventing the things. I think this is the advantages. We are really complementing and with a basis on consistency. Regarding the disadvantages, I think some previous intervention already say that, well, it's the first step. It probably is the man in the month, but there are many things to do afterwards. It's the first step, and we need to learn more and implementing a lot. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Manuel. Arjan, can I have your response?
Yeah, also thank you for the invitation and the very interesting presentations so far. So when we look at the impact, we mainly see that the network code compared to the current NIS directive will lead to more like union-wide governance structure and also risk management process and mandatory security control. So that's something we really see as a change comparing to the current situation. The advantage of the proposed code is that it, like Manuel already mentioned, is that it builds upon existing actors and structures that also already exist. So, for example, connection to the NIS framework, and thereby trying to create this coherent EU cybersecurity framework. It's also, I think, a real advantage that the risk management process will also be conducted on a union level and also regional level, and not only on the entity level. Because as said by previous speakers, of course, we have one interconnected grid. So the whole systemic risk approach that Jonathan also mentioned is, I think, a big advantage of the network code. Another advantage, I think, is that it also creates like a level playing field in the union, and that also the scoping is broad. Because what Joachim already mentioned is that due to the energy transition, a lot of new relevant parties will emerge that can influence the grid. So I guess it's important that the network code is future-proof and also encompasses, well, these less traditional entities that now in the future can also have an influence, a major influence on the grids. There are also some disadvantages, or I would like to call challenges, I guess, to the network code. And the first is that the risk management framework, like Maarten already said, is quite extensive and maybe even sometimes a bit complicated. And there are some short deadlines, and also from a regulator perspective, some intertwined responsibilities between cybersecurity, NCA, and the NRAs and the other parties involved. So I guess that is something that, well, also has to be developed in practice. But that's one of the challenges. And also another challenge is that we should also keep room for innovation and for initiative at the end of the entity. So not getting to a culture of only like compliance, so only complying with like minimal rules set, but also innovating, and also this just culture of continuous improvement. And one of the last challenges may be that because we have the NIS and then we have the net code, there may be some legal uncertainties or some legal questions that have to be answered on how they will relate, also because the net code is risk-based. So the entities that are in scope can vary, and that has an effect on, well, the dependencies between the NIS directive and the net code. So yeah, that would be my my main point. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Arjan, for that. Then Felipe, can we have your answer?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me here, and thank you to all the presenters and panelists. So for my opening remarks, so to the first point on the impact. On the impact, we do believe that the first impact is promoting a better security posture in the electricity market. And this is needed in a way we saw this morning's presentations, the comments, but especially we refer to CERTIU, to our colleague George Kutepas when he was showing the factual data on threats and cybersecurity threats increasing. We see Europe and regions. So this should help and contribute to a better security posture. So this is as a first impact. The second one is it aims to increase the harmonization. And when we say harmonizations across Europe, we are talking about something that goes beyond. The benefit is really trust. And for me, here is the key word: is increasing our harmonization is going to increase the trust among all those actors in the electricity market, but also towards the citizens in EU. And this is, for me, the two main key elements in terms of impact. Advantages of such a network code is that first, the first objective is contributing to this resilience, that we call in electricity. So resilience goes beyond cybersecurity. Here, we heard this morning as well some intervention in this direction. So this is a part of it, is a factor of it, and should contribute to this resilience increase, together with other legislation and many efforts in the industry that are going on there. A second advantage that I see as well through the harmonization, normally on the mid-term, long-term, there is a reduction of costs by having frameworks, standard frameworks, to which products and service providers can deliver with a lower cost. It's normally, not always, and not in all cases, is one of the positive effects of this type of initiatives. The third advantage that I see as well is that it sets a foundation to welcome and to uptake new actors in the electricity that are going to connect to the grid, are connecting now. We heard this morning as well, and will connect in the future. Some we know, some probably we don't know yet. But if we have a grid that is already somehow mature in this area, then this connectivity will be easier, will be more ready for them, and it will be faster, it will be more effective at the end. And this network code also has an advantage, at least in the midterm. It's a complexity when creating, but an advantage for the long term is that it's involving more actors, not only from electricity, but from other domains in the process of cybersecurity, which can only improve the way it's going to be done and how it's going to be tackled, the problem of cybersecurity. And ultimately, it will better improve the capacity to respond to incidents in a coordinated way. So these are clearly, I think, advantages that we all agree on, and we hear through the different contributions. It has also inconvenience, like anything in life, and one is that it's a complex text, not only because technically it has some complexity, but also because it involves many actors from different domains. And then, as anything that is complex, then it takes some time, and it takes some corrections here and there that are needed to make it really effective, applicable, feasible, and all that is needed for that. And then on top of that, the complexity that is doing the creation of such a code comes the fact that most probably the evolution of cybersecurity in the industry will impose that this network code needs to stay sufficiently effective, but also flexible to incorporate in the future new evolutions that we may not know today, but will be there. So this is for me, I would say my opening remarks on this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. That's very enlightening what you bring forward. Can I first start to ask the panelist who likes to react on what was previously answered? Charles.
Yeah. Oh, sure.
Thank you very much, Anios. I'd just like to respond briefly to something that Manuel said about which entities should be covered by the network code. Is it all entities as defined in the NIS directive without any classification in terms of their function or the impact? If so, that's not good. That would be too much. The network code really should clarify this point and focus on real impacts on the grid. Thank you.
Okay. So Manuel, what would you say in response?
Well, I think the entities we mentioned there in the framework we now are taking into consideration, are taking in the drafting period, are those entities which are also considered in the NIS2. On top of that, we have added the digital platform for market and so on, but essentially all the entities are the same as defined in the NIS2. This is why I say complementarity.
But you have to classify them in terms of their function and the impact that attacks on different entities would actually have. Yes, one has to take an intelligent approach to this.
Well, after, I mean, this is the sector, the application of the scope of the network code, and then the network code is requesting, or the draft now is requesting the UDSO entity and the Nsoe entity, Nsoe, to develop thresholds and let's say indicator or indexes in order to facilitate the national competent authority on security as well as the national regulators to classify the entities. I mean, the entities are not going to be classified at European level by the DSOs and TSOs. It's going to be classified at national level by the cybersecurity authorities as well as the national regulator if they are involved in these activities. However, the thresholds and the methodology is going to be set up or proposed by the Nsoe and the UDSO. Then at local level or national level, we will have those big family of entities classified either of high impact entities or critical impact entities. This is what the methodology says. Of course, the SMEs are out of the equation in principle, unless it's demonstrated by the national authorities that they have really impacting directly to the cross-border electricity flows.
Thank you for that, Manuel. I am somewhat reassured by what you say. Clearly, this is a set of issues we're going to need to continue to work very hard and closely on. Crucially, if the classification is to be left to the national authorities, then the network code needs to say that very clearly so that the national authorities know exactly what their responsibilities and what their rights are under the terms of the network code as well. But thank you for that.
Thank you. And perhaps it might also be interesting to hear from Martin how in the drafting committee this issue is being discussed, because it's I think one of the areas where there is a lot of, let's say, well, new development required as well.
Yeah, no, so I can only compliment on what Manuel has said before. I think that the network code closely follows the framework guidelines in this. So entities are classified into 3 parts. So all entities essentially would also be under the NES directive would have to apply sort of hygiene requirements, so lighter requirements to have sort of basic cybersecurity hygiene. But then they're classified based on impact. So there's a threshold. If they're above this threshold, they become high impact, and they would have to apply the minimum security requirements. And if they're above a critical threshold, they become critical impact, and they would have to apply the advanced requirements. So only critical parties really have to apply the most strict requirements. And even within an entity, within one company, the most advanced requirements only apply to the critical assets, so the assets needed to ensure cross-border electricity flows. So even if you have a very big company, only your most critical assets are under the heaviest requirements in network codes. And this way, we really try to focus the controls on the entities and assets that are critical for cross-border electricity flows, whilst also setting a minimum level of security through the hygiene requirements. I think this strikes a good balance between a really focused risk-based approach, but still also making sure that there's no weak links in the system.
Yeah, and just in addition, I forgot to say that it's a strong wording about derogation for these general rules. At least the framework guidelines give a lot of power to the national cybersecurity authorities and the national regulators to make a derogation of an entity, I would say a generator, for instance, based on the outcome of the risk assessment. The national authorities could make a derogation for that particular entity because it's demonstrated through the risk assessment that there are no impact on the cross-border electricity flow.
Okay, thank you very much for this interesting conversation and discussion. With an eye on time, we have another topic that we like to discuss, which is how to move from cyber security to resilience. We have discussed as well the need for speed. We all recognize that we need to act fast, we need to be flexible, but also we should be very careful about how we do this. So we have seen in the previous interventions of Jonathan White, Makoto Takahashi, and Tahir Kapetanovich how grid resilience is pursued across the globe. To Felipe, I would like to start and ask the question, why is the urgency for the network code cybersecurity so high? And does the network code cybersecurity address this in the right way?
Okay, so yes, why the urgency? This is a good question. It came also during the presentation from Andrea Frosini and Olivia Tamao. So first, I will go back also to the basics. Basics is a social need today. Cybersecurity, and it's not only in energy; it's in all sectors. It's a social need. It's something that has been already somehow it's been acknowledged at all levels: professional, business, private. So, as a social need that it is, then today it's a political priority, and then we have seen that today in the strategies of the European Union, but in all regions in the world, especially in North America, in Asia. So we see that cybersecurity is acknowledged usually as one of the top 5, if not higher, risks in the industry. And as such, for the EU, they is also one of the enablers for the security supply of energy. And we see today, in the last weeks, what is happening, not because of cybersecurity, but it could be as well one of the factors. No? So one enabler for secure supply. Second one is for the clean energy transition and the Green Deal. That's one of the key objectives, and it has been recognized as such in the Security Union strategy. And this network code was mentioned inside and somehow to be adopted somewhere of next year. No? And this network code is part, or it goes beyond the electricity sector. It's part of a more global framework to which it complements. So that's also one of the reasons why the urgency for this. No. Then it's complementing within this framework the NIS2 that was mentioned also before by Manuel. No. And this gives the need, or addresses the need, to be more precise, no, on the electricity specific requirements beyond what is or will be established in the new proposal in the NIS2. And the work on this, as in the work code, no, is also important in a way because it's the first of its kind in a way. So there are other network codes, yes, but this one it goes beyond the electricity sector. There are actors inside that are beyond the electricity domain and that are need to be involved. So this is somehow a novelty, I would say, in this area, which makes it more complex and at the same time enriches it. It complements other sector legislations. We mentioned NIS2, resilience, and others. And it's the first network code that is proposed after the clean energy package as well. So all that to say, it's very important. It's very important to do it right. So it's the first point is before urgency. We need to do it right, and that's the challenge here. So, and then there is urgency because I mean some of the points that I said before, but especially that you mentioned all during your remarks and other presentations. No, and maybe just to conclude on that, on a positive remark is that there has been a very good preparatory work by the teams since January this year. So we are confident that the product is going to be good. The content already goes in a very good direction, and now it's a question of addressing the challenges that exist ahead, no? That are now how to convert that in a legal text that is solid and that can be used. But again, as Commission, we are positive that the preparatory work, the work ongoing by the different teams, the drafting teams and the committees, is going in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So to Onuf, I would like to ask the question, which problems does the network code cybersecurity resolve and what remains unresolved?
Yes, just to react on the last question, I think with regard to urgency, I mean, at the moment, we see that, for instance, with regard to smart charging infrastructure, we have a charge point operator in Holland that operates some 250,000 charging points. If you look at what the capacity is that they have under their thumb, as it were, that can create a European problem instantly. And I'm pretty sure that they don't know that they are that critical for the supply chain. So the urgency is there, and it's growing by the day. So I think that's a practical reason why we should go ahead quickly. So I would say the tempo is of the essence. I'm not sure, but I guess we should not only look at the hardware, but also at the system side of things, so the software, because that's one thing, and the other thing is the issue is cross-border. So the organization I just mentioned, they operate European-wide, so they of course, they have to be looked at by the national authority, but who is looking at the bigger picture, as it were, because they operate in the whole of Europe, and this resilience test, or I don't know how it will be called, should apply to, well, should take into account that they are a European company. So it's not only in Holland that they operate, but outside of that, and that's probably with more parties that are involved. So I'm not sure if that is part of the code, or if that is part of the resilience testing, but I think that should be a major issue that should be addressed. So.
Yeah, thank you very much. I see that you want to react, Manuel.
Yeah, on that point of the European, this is really very important. Not so much people discuss about this point. Many people are entering what is my contribution as a company? What are my obligations? As a national regulator, what should I do? It's important to have such a discussion, and the answer to that is yes. At the end of the process, for all the processes, there is a European risk assessment on the cybersecurity. And this is a report which is going to be analyzed not only by Commission, but also by member state, the NIST committee. I think this is important. Of course, ACER is going to oversight the implementation and provide opinions about that together with ENISA and the national authorities and national regulators. The process is really also political. At the end of the day, every 2 years, we're going to have a report approved by Commission. Of course, it's going to be, let's say, 2 reports, one confidential for Commission and the member state, and another public report, which is going to distribute widely. But yes, it's political. It's going to be report on political basis, providing recommendation about that, and providing also what is the status of the Union in terms of cybersecurity for the electricity cross-border.
Thank you very much for that. So for you, Giles, what do you see the problems that are resolved by the network code cybersecurity, and what remains unresolved?
Thank you, Anios. It's very important that we get the risk assessment absolutely right. We need both bottom-up and top-down risk assessment, and we've got to find exactly the right trade-off between the two. There should not be, it would make no sense to have an obligation to report every single incident. You should only be required to report those incidents that we judge are having an impact or may have an impact based on our judgment, based on clear criteria set out in the network code. And the network code has to get those criteria absolutely clear so that we have guidance on the judgments we need to make on impact. Now, some people might take the approach, oh, just report every incident to the national authorities and leave it to them to decide what's critical and what is not. There are 2 problems with that approach. First, it's extremely resource heavy for operators and stakeholders in the electricity system, extremely costly. Second, it would not add value. In fact, it would be less effective because the national authorities would be overwhelmed with reporting from us and they would not know what to do with it. As the operators, we actually have a better judgment.
Thank you very much.
Many national authorities would have. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for those good points that you make. And actually, I think it's a good point for Arjan to react on that as well.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I agree that also on incident reporting, of course, the incident reported the information has to be useful. And also some legal clarity on the thresholds is, I guess, also important. What I would like to add is that, of course, the focus is now primarily on cybersecurity, which is, I guess, a precondition for a resilient grid. I think it's also important to also see what other aspects of grid resilience also entail. So that also comes to the presentation of Jonathan White. So for example, looking at single point of failures that might exist and whether or not those can also be mitigated. So creating a different, maybe like more grid architecture. So trying to prevent certain single point of failures. And then you get to like a mix of cybersecurity measures and more electrotechnical measures, and also the point of diversification in the grid. So that let's say the impact of cybersecurity incidents can also have a lesser effect on the total grid. So that comes to the point of mitigating cascading effects. So that's maybe also a topic to think about, because of course we now look at the discussion primarily through the lens of cybersecurity, which is natural, which is very relevant and important. But there is also like the more physics part of grid security and measures that you can take. So that's something I would like to add.
Thank you very much. So can I ask you, Martin, to give your view on, we hear about, let's say, the importance of the issue, everyone agrees, and also that all the parties involved have their own responsibility. A lot needs to happen, a lot of work is involved as well. And yet we know that there is enormous scarcity in the resources capable of doing this work. How do you see, from, let's say, the perspective of the TSO community, who are, let's say, in the drafting committee, how this should work? And also to have your perspective, the issues that we discussed, how they will be resolved in the network code cybersecurity, and what still remain issues potentially.
Yeah, so as I said, there is a lot of work, for instance, to do this risk assessment well, and it also requires quite some expertise. And I think, of course, ENTSO-E and EUDSO have to take an active role in that, and I think are preparing to take an active role in that, but it will also require other parties. So wind, solar, electric vehicle charging, they all play a part in risk, and without knowledge from those parties about the risk, we may have an incomplete view. So it's very important for ENTSO-E and the EUDSO entity to reach out to these entities and to get all the knowledge needed to understand the risks. What I think is an especially important open issue is what I think Arjen, for instance, mentioned, is the thresholds that need to be defined. The network code doesn't fix a threshold when an entity is critical. That will have to be determined. And to find an objective measure for this, I think, is challenging. I mean, we often feel like if a party is controlling a lot of megawatt of power, then that become a risk for the grid. But at how many megawatts do you draw the border for it becoming critical? And we need to have some expertise to do this, especially as the grid is changing. You have a lot of parties interacting in a complex manner. So charging stations, producers, Nsoe, market parties, TSOs. So it's sometimes not easy to understand the impact of one party, and also how to deal with, for instance, smaller parties. So there are a lot of small wind farms, but if they all are sort of maintained by the same party, the same installer, or they use the same equipment, there's an increased chance that they would all be hit at the same time for cyber attacks. So how do you take those kind of correlated threats into account when you do the risk assessment, and when you define who is a critical impact company for the grid? So I think that's quite challenging work, and we will need a lot of expertise to solve this from different people.
Okay, thank you very much. So looking at the clock, we come to the end of this panel discussion that provided us with highly interesting views on the challenges ahead, achieving appropriate resilience levels in our electricity supply chain. My main takeaways are the commitment of all stakeholders to act, and that active collaboration of all stakeholders is conditional to keeping up with the malicious actors. So I'd like to thank the audience for their questions, and the panel for their enlightening interventions. And for the wrap-up, of this event, I'd like to give over to our esteemed colleague, Nicolas Richet, the CIO of Nsoe and the Secretary of the Digital Committee of Nsoe. Please, Nicolas, go ahead.
Anios, can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I cannot see you.
But apparently I've just been unmuted and you might have the frightening experience of seeing me quite soon now, apparently, if I look at the flying donut on my screen.
Okay.
It's coming, et voila.
Yes.
So good afternoon, and thank you for the introduction, Anios. Those of my generation may remember the 1980s movie, War Games. May recall nice memories or not. At that time, cyber attack topic could be seen as a hobby for IT geeks in some universities, and food for Hollywood scenario writers in need to offer a distracting movie. Putting aside the names of the attack groups, and thank you, George Kutepas, to sharing with us the Berserk bear name. The fun is long gone by now. We are in a situation that General Jean-Marc Vigilant, who leads the war school of the French army, describes as a gray zone that is neither war nor peace, but a permanent crisis where any criminal or enemy, or often a mix of both, can test and then attempt breaking down any infrastructure, even or particularly the most vital ones with just a couple of computers and a small group of high profile, call them cyber warriors, I call them criminals, period. The first thing I have noted is that presentation and speeches have been delivered by system operators, specialists, and executives. This is, I believe, a testimony that, willingly or not, cybersecurity is now an intrinsic part of operating safely the grid. For professionals in charge of operating the electrical system, power engineering is indeed the mother tongue, but cybersecurity is now one of their second languages, and they know they need to be reasonably fluent at it. Then I will now list a couple of keywords that I have noted during this event. The first one, of course, is resilience. It's the theme of this year's conference. And I believe it is the sign that is now very well established that it is not about will we face cyber incidents targeting the grid, but how do we successfully face them? From a risk management perspective, this is good because we indeed still address the mitigation part of it, but we do also equally address the contingency aspect. Then I have noted that socio-technical system mentioned by Professor Takahashi, to which I would add a cyber-physical system that was mentioned in a 2019 Nsoe report. That means that the resilience of the grid is a direct function of both the resilience of the information and communication infrastructure, but also very importantly, the attitude of the individuals. And I cannot sufficiently encourage everyone to attend training such as the Blue Team, Red Team training of ENCS that I personally attended, where you can very practically realize in a very impactful manner how an error in dealing with a mail can lead to the bang of the switch being opened by an attacker. Very good and nice experience, or frightening if you prefer. Third term I have noted is changes. Changes happening to the grid at all levels, transmission and distribution, from bulk power to prosumer, as was pictured by John White, or what Tahir Kapetanovic just summarized with the notion of grid pluralism. The importance of taking into account elements of the grid or connected to the grid in its broader meaning, such as wind farms or electric mobility, has been underlined by the panelists. This notion of change to the grid as directly relates, in my view, to two other keywords of this event, collective and common. This was, by the way, brilliantly illustrated by the joint presentation by Andrea and Olivier on the network code. And I would say, Roberto, not one on one side and the other on the other side, but really jointly. It is all about sharing, although in a controlled manner, as has been mentioned on various occasions, developing common guidelines, and where needed, having the proper, necessary and sufficient regulations. The objective is indeed to increase the common level of preparedness and resilience. No surprise that it is at the very center of the network code, and no surprise that all actors we have seen do call for joint action. Joachim van Zetta did it very early this morning. So as to raise the collective level on cybersecurity, to meet common, and I use here an IT familiar terminology, minimum viable requirements of, and here I also take this very good term of cyber hygiene that was first, I believe, raised by Andrea and Olivier. It has been also pointed out that preparedness cannot be based on fixed schemes because threats permanently evolve, and here agility is of the essence. So whatever we develop, it needs to take into account this possibility, this need of agility. Again, here, sharing and learning from others is key. And I have noted with interest this Clean Energy CyberSec Accelerator mentioned by John White. And by the way, very important, also mentioned a couple of occasions, rehearse in conditions as close as possible to real life. And for Christmas, I want to get this ARIAS cyber range also mentioned, introduced by John White. Cyber exercising, if I can use this neologism, is key. So indeed, as noted again by Andrea and Olivier, this part of the network code is essential, having these European and regional wide regular exercises. Finally, I would mention supply chain, very important. This has been mentioned again very early this morning by Joachim, and then again mentioned on various occasions. Indeed, it is hard to think of assets used in the grid or to operate it that do not integrate in a way or another IT code. Maybe only cable and wires, at least for the time being. The solar winds example illustrates why a holistic view must be taken, both product, software, and also services, again mentioned by Andrea and Olivier. I could keep on listing other important ones, such as speed and urgency. And I could go on for a moment, given how rich the content of this conference has been this year again, I reckon. But I probably need to conclude now. I suppose I'm about to see Roberto's face appearing on my screen. So I'll start, or I'll conclude by sincerely and warmly thank the presenters and panelists for what they have shared today. It is thanks to them and those of the previous years that this yearly workshop has become, and I quote here Roberto, a signature event attended by a large audience, even under the current frustrating COVID conditions. It is certainly encouraging for the partners that organize this event to continue offering this opportunity to share and learn. So I take the double risk of telling you, see you next year, and see you next year physically. And until then, stay safe and take good care of your cyber hygiene. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Nicolas. And thank you for wrapping up in such an effective way. Yes, as a matter of fact, see you next year. But the point is when. While I was attending and trying to moderate this event, I came up to a resolution, and I make it public without having negotiated or discussed it with our other partners, so Nsoe and ENTSO-E. I am sure, and especially after this extremely in-depth part reserved to the process of the network code on cybersecurity, I'm pretty sure that if we try in 2022 to have a special event of these ENTSO-E, NCS, Nsoe meeting on cybersecurity right after the approval of the network codes, just to examine, first of all, how much you were right during this morning, but also to comment fresh and warm the product that has come out from a thorough cooperation of the main stakeholders, ACER and the Commission. And I would like to propose that, and we shall be working on that, because something around the end of February, March next year, to give the course and assess exactly the width of the compass and the map where TSOs and DSOs will move the first steps with the new network code could be, if not essential, certainly interesting for many. And on top of that, it means that we shall have the regular one, and maybe this time also physical, and maybe in the second part of the year. But let's try to shorten up the rendezvous of next year, and let it be a landmark right after the network code approval. I wish to thank here all the panelists and all the speakers that have used this floor and this screen, and the quality of your contribution has been really high this time as well. Yes, this is a signature event. Yes, let's hope to have it physical next time. And thanks to all participants that have been staying with us. We lost very, very few if you compare to the normal course of these online events, and we have got everybody a lot of experience now after 1.5 years of exercise. And thanks very much to the staff of Nsoe, to the staff of ENCS for the unseen work which is behind the screen, and a special thank to Paola and Claire from the staff of EDSO and Ginevra for tweeting, and all the colleagues taking notes and pictures and giving suggestions over our internal chat over this day. So goodbye, accelerated rendezvous early part of next year, discussing the freshly cooked cybersecurity network code. Bye.
Bye-bye.